Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dean. This podcast has brought me the chance to speak with remarkable industry figures. In this episode, we're reflecting on standout moments from the past few months. So stay tuned for some distilled wisdom and knowledge from the world of property and finance. Let's dive in. Thought it probably a good idea to if you can, obviously for you to sort of talk through your career journey, so that there's no better time like that. So you're in your mid-20s, you're working at Carphone Warehouse. How did you end up at Carphone Warehouse? How did you, obviously it'd be interesting to see how you went from Carphone Warehouse and mobile telephones to the specialist finance industry. But what was university like, and or did you go to university, and how did you end up in Carphone?
Let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
I was not particularly academic, and I would put that down to being kind of slightly lazy. So I went to a public school, came out with a few O-levels, did some retakes, came out with some more. Anyway, I started working in the late 80s for a merchant bank called Hill Sandwich. Started as a temp and then became a perm, and I stuck there for a few years until they made me redundant. And they made it really, nobody wants to stay. And I had a little job to do, which I finished, and they said, Phil, stay. But then the redundancy payment was quite low, and I owed quite a lot of money, spending it, living out, trying to keep up with my friends, the Joneses sort of thing. So I went to work for an actuarial firm called Frank Russell and did that for a few years. But the Carphone Warehouse thing came much, much later. There's a guy called Simon Jordan. Mm-hmm. It was part of my youth.
Simon Jordan, who's also quite well known for having connection with Crystal Palace, which is obviously your football team.
Well, we did stand on the terrace together. His old man used to live down the road, so it was good because I could go to his house, watch TV, go to the game, come back, watch TV before, let the crowds disperse. In fact, Simon Jordan was in my flat in Battersea back in 1990 when we got to the Cup final. We were too lazy to go and queue to get tickets, so we had to watch it on TV like everybody else, and we watched the 3-3 and then the 1-0, and it was good. But we did go to, I'm trying to think what the game was called, the Tin Pot Cup, where we beat Everton 4-1 or 4-2.
So, the Tin Pot Cup. Is that the official title?
It was called ZDS at the time. It was one of those.
Zenith Data Systems Club.
Yeah. Well, it's something, So we went to Wembley. We did win something. And he went on to a successful career building that business, which he sold and used some of the money to buy Selhurst Park.
Well, there you go.
But unfortunately, I suspect he wasn't wealthy enough to sustain it because, it's a billionaire's playground now.
It certainly is, yeah.
And if you're not a billionaire, you need to team up with some other people. But right, he owned it for 10 years, I think, until he didn't pay his bills. And someone said, we'll have that back now.
Yeah.
So you got the parish mob, and, I think I was a fan of Palace from the 70s, late 70s. And look at us now, 13 years in the Premiership. How good is that? All the London derbies, we're not doing particularly well right now, but I live in hope.
As a long-suffering Arsenal fan, or perhaps a bit less suffering than a Palace fan, yeah, I certainly...
your expectations are up there, ours are here. And when we get a scalp like yours, and we do occasionally...
You do occasionally.
It's much a greater feeling. It's like winning the cup every game. Whereas Arsenal, well, you expect to win. So, you don't know what hurt really is.
No. Yeah, no, we haven't experienced relegation, that's for sure. Going back to your career trajectory, so you were working with Simon, and then what came next?
I did. I worked in telecoms for a while because it was quite a sexy environment. They paid well. And I was playing cricket with a guy who works at UTB. He's one of the senior directors there. And he worked for a little bank in Epsom called Ruffler Bank. And he used to open. He's 6'5", so he'd just swing his arm, and that was a bouncer. And most people were like, duck or get out of the way. I was more line and length. And if you didn't hit the ball, it would hit the wicket.
Yeah.
That was a routine, and it worked. We were playing for a company called the Weekenders. It was a thespian cricket team set up by a guy called Clive Swift. And if you don't know who he is, think of the actor in Keeping Up Appearances with Hyacinth Bouquet. Mm-hmm. He was the henpecked husband.
Yeah.
Charming chap. He set up this thing in the 70s for his...
That was Clive Swift. That was literally Clive Swift.
Yeah. And we used to go up to Totteridge and Whetstone and play for our home games. Really, we'd travel all over the UK as long as there was daylight, and the teas were the best bit. And some of the people we played with were actors. There was a guy, Mike Reed, I think he was called. He was Captain Birdseye. I mean, they're not famous actors because they had time to play cricket.
Yeah.
They had lots of time to lose between jobs, which might be every couple of years. So Jonathan and I were ringers, as were a few of the other players. All lived in Wandsworth, but ended up travelling all the way to Totteridge and Whetstone for our home games, or further afield for the aways. It was good. I liked it, and it was something to do, as you do in your 20s.
And then how did that translate to sort of the career progression then?
Well, Jonathan said, would you fancy coming to lend? Now, bear in mind, I've been in business-to-business sales or business-to-consumer, and lending money is not about putting it out, it's getting it back in. What did I know? So I go and work at Ruffler Bank in Epsom, and I was lending to showmen, travellers, the coin-op business. Think of the amphibious vehicle that went around London, and
the duck tours.
The ducks, that we funded those. And it taught me a lot about measuring people because, my wife's a great judge of character. And she'll tell you the first thing she said when she met Simon Jordan was something that was pretty unpleasant, as did my two sisters as well. But you've got to actually judge a character, and dealing with people, particularly the showman's fraternity. They're a world apart from what I was. And if I learned anything when I was at Ruffler Bank, it was a better measure of people. And also I learned a bit about lending property. And after 6 years there, I got tapped up by a broker called Keith he's a Bury boy as well. And Ruffler Bank never took commissions from brokers or introductions.
It wasn't Keith Foster, was it?
It was. Good old Keith.
I know Keith, yeah.
Well, Keith introduced me to the head of property at Davenham. They just floated. They were talking about creating a London office. So on a wet Tuesday night, I was up at Euston Station meeting Gary Ellis. And guess what? The next job, I was meeting what was my line manager then, Martin Risman. He looked after trade and asset. I looked after the property in London at the Savoy. And then I went up for about 9 interviews at the head office in Manchester, and they gave me a job. And actually, that was probably the pinnacle of my career because it was an AIM-listed firm. Our office was its own profit and loss centre, and it exploded. It was the good days when the trajectory was like that. And I was lending money at 85% loan to GDV.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? But there's stamp duty was pretty much 4% across the board. Buy-to-let exits were at 85, 90. So there was this sort of... and I remember lending money where people literally didn't put anything more than stamp duty, legals and a QS report.
Amazing.
Absolutely stunning. Until it all fell over.
And
then it fell over, and it properly fell over.
So what sort of time horizon are we talking about here? When did you...
2006 to 2010.
Yeah.
So I was lending, then it...
So you were like 2000, 2006, you were at Ruffler, and then 2006, 2010, you were at Davenham.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it was good. Davenham would have been the Aldermore. And funnily enough, Ruffler Bank's banking licence, when Roy wanted to sell up, that became the Aldermore banking licence. And, you've seen how that Challenger Bank has grown and grown and grown. So it was one of my opportunities to be a millionaire. Well, it's not happened. And am I crying about it? No, it keeps me motivated. I think you said to me when we met the other week, you must be comfortable. I'm never comfortable. You get out of bed, there's things to do. Am I going to play golf? No. Am I going to sunbathe? No. When we had a house in France, the wife would go there for several months. I was happy to work. I'd pop in and see her just to sort of keep the peace. But there's people need looking after. And I suppose what I'm trying to get at is when I got to about 32 and I was lending purely on property, I found my vocation. I do what I like, when I like, with who I like. So what's not to like about that? And it works for me because it's not a job. It's a solution. Give me a problem and I'll try and, I remember years ago, I had a boss at Ruffler Bank, Frank Russell. And he said to me, Phil, you always come in looking to take something and put it in a box and tie the bow. And I said, that's right. I'll take that. And that sort of stuck in my mind. Get a problem, fix it. Good, bad or ugly, indifferent. And if you can help somebody, so if you've got any problems, talk to me later with your colleagues.
And see what you can do.
Yeah, so go. I know I lose track or go off on sort of.
I think it's called a weave.
A weave. I'm not dodging the question, but so Davenham. Then I spent a few years winding Toyota because I'd done quite a lot of winding down at Davenham, fixing problems, taking situations, making them good, because that's what was the right thing to do, was to fund schemes to a finish, because you get more pennies in the pound. And when you got shareholders, and we were sponsored by 10 banks, they were happy to do that, as long as there was a chance of getting more back than just selling it as it was, and you'll get that. A friend of mine, one of the guys I laid off, he was part of our team, a guy called John Jury. He rang me up and said, "Oh, look, Phil, bearing in mind what you've done, how do you fancy coming to wind down this company called Toyota?" And I hadn't heard of them.
So this is why you're still at Davenham at this point?
I'd almost finished. I was almost finished up.
So just for the benefit of those of us who came into the specialist finance market a bit like, 5, 6, 7 years after the financial crisis, as we did, presumably Davenham's business model just wasn't sustainable, because they lent essentially too much money against a load of developments that ended up...
Well, you imagine you do 85% loan to GDV and the market drops 25. It doesn't matter if you do a penny out, you're underwater.
Yeah, you're underwater.
Absolutely underwater.
So that was it, just blew up, basically.
Blew up. For those that were left, we were retained to wind the company down. And I left on the 21st of December in 2010. In fact, I'd just forgotten. I had a job in between. I went to work with my mate Martin Risman, and we went to COFAS, the global credit insurer.
Oh, yeah.
He said, "Phil, I know what you like. You don't need to know the product set." So I moved to COFAS. So I literally 21st, started on the Monday, took a week or two off, and then, on the coalface, selling invoice discounting, quite big ticket stuff. February, we all get called in. I was at an RSM conference, and we all get called back to the office. "Oh, we're selling the book, so you're going to be out of a job." And I'm thinking, well, I got paid out quite well on that one. Am I going to get paid out well on this one? Well, the wife benefited from a brand new car, an Audi. So, we didn't do too badly.
Wasn't too bad.
No, so I almost forgot that. COFAS for about a year. And that's where my mate John Jury ran and said, "Toyota, we're taking the books and we're going to wind it down." So I did some ugly stuff.
So can you tell people, again, Toyota has a... For some of the more experienced people in the industry, they obviously know the full story behind Toyota.
You mean older?
But again...
Say it as it is.
Well, no, I mean, look, I wouldn't classify myself as particularly young myself anyway, but because we came into the industry 4 or 5 years after, we didn't have the benefit of the history. We just hear the name Toyota and we know it was a bit of a shit show.
Do you know what the acronym means?
You did tell me this over lunch, but but you've got to say it again.
Take it up the... and I leave you to make your own mind up. There's all sorts of rumours whether that was a true acronym, but the people who set it up, I don't know. Maybe it was.
Yeah.
But for an organisation that came from nowhere, in my mind, it exploded. I remember going to the equivalent of the FP show or MBO show at that period of time. They had the front stand. They had Big Rob Jupp was working for them. I mean, you can't miss him.
No, you certainly can't miss Rob, no.
And they were prolific, writing lots of business, because most people weren't. And then, it all
So when was their sort of heyday? Was it
9, 10?
So during the GFC, basically?
Yeah.
And where were they getting the funding from? How, I thought that would have been very hard to fund.
This is where I sort of come into it. There was a company called Connaught Asset Management that worked with financial advisors raising capital, offering double-digit returns, but they were using low risk. Now, you and I now know that there's no such thing as low risk.
So they mislabeled it, basically.
Yeah. I mean,
that missold. It was missold.
Missold. Really, the real crux of the matter is what went on within Connaught and Toyota itself. I'm sure there's a gagging order, so I'm going to be a little bit restricted on what I say, but it wasn't what it seemed. It wasn't what it should have been. And when I got there, I went to work for Connaught. We'd bought the 2 books. One was unregulated, one was regulated. The regulated was actually quite a good book. In fact, Fred Sarto, who was at, I forget now which firm, he actually made a profit out of that. The unregulated book, well, it was dead in the water. And, first thing I did was have a look at the files and go, refinancing, bridging a bridge was not the right thing to do then. It's not necessarily the right thing to do now. But it was pretty ugly, and I think it was dead in the water before it started. It didn't have any legs, but it continued. And You might have read in January this year, 2 people got found guilty to the tune of 20 million. Now, that wasn't a Crown prosecution. That was
a private prosecution.
Private prosecution. What happens next, I have no idea. But that's 2024. I was there.
That's how long it took. That's how long it's taken.
12 years.
Yeah.
And, well, where's the money? Frittered somewhere. They had a swanky office. Apparently the company cars were pretty executive for a lowly
So
BDM.
there's a lot of, basically a lot of jiggery pokery, and money. A lot of money went into, should we say, the ether.
It went sideways.
Yeah.
Right, in the drains.
In the drains, yeah.
The drains.
Okay.
But that was another good experience to sort of have a look on the other side, back into a lender, but how not to lend and how you got to be careful what you do and how you do it. And an oversight function, I think you need to have more than one. So I do something, you watch, but someone else is watching you, watching me, because then you might find out what goes on. And, I don't think there's any whistleblows there. So I don't really know how it came about.
How big of an organisation, like in terms of headcount? Like presumably, there can't have been too many people in the firm generally. No,
I think they're 20, 30 at its peak, because they had in-house lawyers, they had a good sales team, people that are still in the company in our sector now, because they didn't do anything wrong.
No,
it was the management.
Yeah.
Having
in-house lawyers, I guess again, you can kind of. You mark your own homework, can't you? From a credit perspective, see no evil, hear no evil, right?
White collar crime does pay,
or
it did. But I look at that and just go, that was a great opportunity to learn things and look on the other side, and dealing with administrators. When I was at Davenham, we wound the company down using the support of a company called MCR. MCR became Duff and Phelps. Duff and Phelps is now Kroll, but I'd had some contacts there I forgot about. So when they found me at Toyota, they laid a lot of staff off, but they kept me because they said, Phil, you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which was no disrespect to the others, but it kept me in a job for a couple of years.
But before we skip on to the next phase, when we were having lunch, you were telling me about a situation where you ended up having to actually sue an administrator when you're on your way out of Toyota, or have I misremembered that? The history of that.
Connor eventually fell foul like everybody else. The business went bust, and said our own administrator had verbally said he would fulfill certain obligations. In my case, was 6 months' notice on the exit. We all called in one day. Well, what happened is we get to the office in Wimbledon, no keys. There's a security guard on the inside. Comes in, checks you down. Said you can sit on that seat, but I want your password and all the rest of it. And in 5 minutes, we'll lead you out. And we all were given envelopes. And on that envelope said, this is what you're getting. And it was purely statutory. So there was 5 of us, including Nick Hilton, John Jury, and he was a guy who employed me who I'd laid off previously. So he got his own back on me. And they said, that's it. You're not getting any notice. You got your statutory, which ran into a few £100. So we made complaints, and we just made it very painful for him because he had to deal with these complaints under his brand. I think it was ICAEW. Well, guess what? It didn't create. He didn't get in any trouble, but he did get sacked and kicked out of the accountancy group for something else because we knew he was kind of. It was all about him and not about anyone else. But
right.
So yeah. Whether we played a part in it, but of course, when you mark people's cards, I'm sure these organisations keep a list of, whether they call them a complaint. It's a bit complaint handling is now. Well, he's gone.
It might have been the straw that broke the camel's back because you'd made a complaint. You made a complaint about him, but you weren't the only one. And all of a sudden, they're like, right, okay, we've got to have a closer look into this individual.
Yeah, well, he was a sole trader effectively. And if you work for a big organisation, yes, there's the brand, but beneath it is always the person, not a partner of whether PwC, Deloitte, or anything else. So I was glad he got his comeuppance. I didn't get another redundancy payment or a big one, but I got 2 good ones. So should I really complain? So the wife's still got a new car and I haven't. That's where.
And is that why you ride a motorbike?
That's when it's half a car, right?
Yeah.
So it was a good time. Lots of learning, lots of experience, and it kind of sets me apart from, a lot of people have not had that. And a lot of people were older than me in the previous crisis, 90s. They're out of the industry now, retired, whatever. So I see the problems today in the same way as I did then, and I actually have a solution for it. Because a lot of people I've been tapped up with, clients, come to me with problems where they historically had a good broker, but that broker doesn't know anything about, maybe they don't want to deal with more problematic cases, whereas I enjoy that. At the end of the day, I'd love a vanilla deal every day of the week where it's 65% loan to GDV or 70% LTV on a bridging loan, and vanilla client 100%, 999 out of 1,000 credit. Well, they've already been serviced by some of the bigger packages. So, crumbs off the table works for me. Give me a problem, I solve it.
I think at the end of the day, as many of our specialist finance listeners and viewers know, you don't break a solid existing relationship by offering the same thing that everyone else can. You break into relationships because you offer something that someone else can't offer, or because someone's dropped the ball and made a mistake. And that's fundamentally, and you're, in your case, you're obviously offering something that, well, you're probably doing both, right? You're fixing someone else's mistake, or you're offering something different, or something that people aren't willing to do. Let's talk about the last 10, 15 years and how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, so it got to a point in my life, 2014, I was running 7 different companies as either a chairman, an MD, or a non-exec within Mighty. I had 4 children. I still have 4 children. But at that point, 4 kids, 7 different companies. I knew there'd be an 8th and a 9th. I was quite clear in my mind there wasn't going to be a 5th child. And I was spending some of the best years of my life not with the ones that I love, quite frankly. I sat down with my wife, Sharon. We've been married now for 26 years. I sat down with her and said, I think I'm done now with corporate life. I've put my 24, 25 years of service in. I made a lot of people a lot of money, and it was time to, for once, put my family first. I'd spent probably, for my 2 boys, they're 21 and 24 now. I missed a lot of their growing up, that really important board meeting where I missed the school play or the school sports day. I can't remember what we did in that board meeting now, but I know damn well I missed too many of those sports days and things. So, and I can never get that time back. But what I could do was change the future. So I sat down with our chief exec. In fact, actually, it took me a couple of months to sit down with my chief exec. But at that point, when I said to Sharon, right, I'm out of here, that was the mindset shift for me. At that point, my employer was funding my exit strategy. They didn't know it. I knew it. I didn't know how long I was going to work with Mighty. And I ended up, 2 months later, sat down with our chief exec. And we had that conversation. She asked me to stay for another year. To manage the final integration of a number of mergers and acquisitions. And when I say integration, you probably know what that means. And making more people redundant is all the crap that nobody else wants to deal with. So again, I was plunged headlong into corporate transformation at a level. There's certain sectors that the PLC wanted to exit. So again, that was another pretty intense time, really. But out of the end of it, I had set my mind on that was the last of corporate life for me. I was going to create that legacy for my family's future. In doing that, I was very clear that not only did I want to create the legacy, I wanted to create the baton change as well, the custodianship that came with that. So it gave me a little bit of time to think. Came out of corporate life absolutely exhausted, but reinvigorated on what the future held. I'd been no stranger to property. All of those data centers, we'd probably done 80 or 90 data centers in 30 odd countries. So I knew the process of acquisition. I knew the process of everything from the design, the tendering, the construction, the process, setting to work, asset management, and all the maintenance regimes. I was very, say, comfortable with that, working with a fantastic team, but I could see the opportunity there. But one of the greatest privileges for me over my corporate career was working with really talented people. And my role as a leader was to identify that talent and just breathing oxygen into that talent and giving them the phenomenal opportunity there to rise. I suppose it was the reverse to this, maybe what I perceived as a civil service culture, which my dad came from. My dad he worked for 50 years for the same employer. He sat at the same desk, was probably proud that he had 4 chairs, different chairs over that 50 years, but sat at the same desk for 50 years. And I vowed to myself that wouldn't be me. I admired his grit and pluck and courage to give us the best start in life. But that was one of the greatest lessons I've had of how I didn't want to operate. And I wanted to create not the civil service culture where, well, I can't teach you how to do that. Otherwise, you'll be able to do my job. Quite the opposite. If I can give you every support you need, you'll be able to do my job. It'll make me redundant out of my role. And I had the confidence and self-belief that the next opportunity in a growth organisation awaited me. Things like corporate troubleshooting or maybe, running global expansion programs. So I've actually only ever had 2 employers in my life. I've probably had about 60 or 70 roles. And I've always had that thrill of seeing people outperform and achieve whatever they thought was possible. And I just love that feeling. So it was a natural position for me to then start backing great talent, working with great talent, and seeing them achieve fantastic businesses. So that's my passion now.
Yeah. And what was, if we just talk through the journey as a property developer, and then we can maybe talk about the journey as a sort of venture capitalist, and maybe for want of a better expression. But how did you progress the property development piece? What do the first developments look like, and then maybe just give people a bit of colour as to the type of development investment that you're doing now.
So I exited May 2015. And of course, what we had at that stage was permitted development rights. Had been there for a couple of years. They were about to go permanent. So we saw quite a unique opportunity for us to use our skills to move into commercial to residential conversions. I actually thought that would be a little bit easier than it was. I put together my CV, my experience. 80 data centers ranging from 10 million up to 200 million each. Massive corporate deployment. And the first few banks that we went and had conversations with, they said, that's marvellous. Any chance of any residential in any of that? So I had to kind of re-earn my spurs again. But that was a short blip. But the first opportunity we saw, my business partner actually found it in Colchester. It was owned by a local businessman. Nigel went for a haircut, and there was a guy on some step ladders drilling the for sale sign in. He had a chat with him, said, yeah, the building's going on the market tomorrow. This is about 10 o'clock in the morning. On the way over to have his haircut, he called the agent, said, can I have a look at it at lunchtime? Said, yep, but it's going on the market tomorrow morning. Had his haircut, went to visit it, called me. He was in his car on his laptop. We did the numbers. We put an offer in at 1:30 that afternoon, and it was rejected. Mm-hmm. We put a counter offer in at 2:30, another one in at 4 o'clock, and we got a yes at 5 o'clock that afternoon.
Nice.
So from
Agent didn't have to work very hard then.
No, he didn't. No, it was 4 screws and a step ladder. But the local guy who he'd been running out of this business for quite some time. He was retiring, and he just wanted a safe and easy passage, to be honest. So we'd met him when we did the walk around. So that was actually the quickest deal that we've ever done. From seeing it to getting a yes was the first one. That was about 7 hours.
Yeah,
and took probably 5 months to get to legal completion on it, but yeah, that was permitted development rights, and that was the way that had been structured. It already had PD. He really liked 2-bed apartments, and these apartments were between 90 and 95 square meters each. They were
for
big
2 beds. They're far too big.
Yeah, huge. And of course, the sales price per square foot in that area at the time, I mean,
it's not great.
No, it would have been competing with the 2-bed starter home where you could park your car on a driveway. So we sweat the asset. We went back in for PD. Literally doubled everything, to be honest. 16 1-bed apartments. It was probably the smoothest development we've ever done. 12-month build, we had a queue as long as you like down the road when we put them on the market.
This podcast is sponsored by Avamore Capital. Avamore Capital is a development and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales, lending on projects from £250,000 all the way up to £25 million on bridging, development, refurb and part complete developments. Please visit www.avamorecapital.com to find out more. But for those of us who perhaps don't know you quite so well or aren't as familiar with you, can you talk us through your journey? I understand you started out at Young and Rubicam in the post room.
You have done your research
in the early days.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was school like, and how did you end up in advertising in the first instance?
God, what was school like? School was an interesting place. So I went from the normal state school into actually a private school, and I hated it. First of all. Was bullied mercilessly for the first 2-3 years by teachers and kids alike. But I sort of found my footing, and ended up sort of enjoying it in the 5th and 6th form. But I really sort of found my defence was playing the fool and humour and that kind of stuff. And it was only really in the last couple of years I really found the last 2 or 3 years, really found my friendship group and found my place. And then it was actually the outside activities in terms of a separate youth club, separate group of people, forming a band at 17 that sort of gave me all my confidence and everything else. So actually it was the out of school activities that really kept me sane and kept me from going off the rails. So I was a bit of a reprobate at school.
Well, we got a question about your musical activities that we'll ask in the second part of this interview. So coming up to the end of school, what was the decision making process like? Like, where did was uni on the table, or was it straight into work?
It was scraping enough qualifications to go to Poly, actually, very proudly Polytechnic rather than uni. So I went off to Leeds. I wanted to go up north, definitely. So me and my best mate from school, there were 4 of us who were best mates. 2 went to Manchester, 2 went to Leeds. So we just spent time going from Leeds to Manchester every weekend, having fun. But yeah, it was Leeds Business School on an HND, first of all. And then me and my mate did well in our first year, because suddenly it was people didn't care whether we turned up or not, didn't care whether we worked. And actually that reverse psychology worked really well on me. I hated authority, hated being told what to do. That didn't really work for me. But actually when I thought, oh my God, this is me. If I don't do this, then I'm losing. So that really helped. So I started to work, and we did well in the first year, and then both transferred onto a economics and politics degree. So I actually did 4 years at Leeds and loved every second of it.
What Leeds Uni is that now? Is that Leeds Met?
It's Leeds Metropolitan University. Yeah, we were really upset. We were the first year to get our qualification certificates as Leeds Metropolitan University. We all complained.
What was it before?
Leeds Poly.
Leeds Poly.
Yeah, which is what we all wanted. So, yeah, I loved the Poly. Poly experience was great because it was just people from all walks of life. So it was really, really interesting. University, you tend to get a lot more certain type of student, certainly at Leeds at the time. But the Poly was really just everyone from everywhere. So it was really good fun.
That actually sounds brilliant. I could almost imagine as sort of maybe like sort of Citizen Smith type vibes as well. Was there?
I was a bit Citizen Smith. Yeah,
I think some of our younger viewers have no idea what I'm referring to there. I think I'm just about old enough to know what that was. Probably second time around. So coming out of Leeds Poly, Leeds Met, what was the plan?
No plan really. It was I really wanted to do marketing, PR, advertising. That was what I wanted to do, and it was really hard to get a job. So those are the days where you get the Guardian on a Monday for the media section, and I must have written off for about 300 jobs or something, and it was really hard. It's a bit of a recession type period as well, sort of
early
92, early 90s.
Yeah.
And that's how old I am. And so it was quite tough to get a job. And then I ended up, a friend of my dad's was high up in Young and Rubicam, the ad agency. And he said, look, we're taking on graduates, but we're taking them on $7,000 a year in the post room, and we'll see what happens. So I thought, yeah, well, I'll try that. And lo and behold, there were no promotions anywhere. And from my taking the post around in my little trolley and delivering it to people and getting friendly with the different sections, they had a sister company which was direct marketing, and they had the Diet Coke account at the time. So I ended up leading a team of actors, musicians, models, and me, just going around giving out free samples of Diet Coke, and that sort of opened up a year of doing direct marketing work.
And what did that look like? For those people who aren't familiar with what those direct marketing campaigns look like, what sort of things were you doing?
So it's mainly directly engaging the public. So for Diet Coke, for example, I had my Diet Coke hat, my T-shirt, my watch, my Diet Coke tracksuit, trainers, sunglasses, driving my big Diet Coke truck and going around the country to sort of like concerts, football matches, supermarkets, markets, and giving out free samples of Diet Coke. I did everything from dressing up as a Blockbuster kid. So in the days where Blockbuster were there, you'd have one of those big uniforms on, where the kids could beat you up, but you're not allowed to speak to them, giving out leaflets on the street, or actually commentating on Tekken fights in Southampton.
Oh wow!
So there was like PlayStation, early days of PlayStation competitions, and I'd be the commentator commenting on this these
two guys playing
PlayStation fights and stuff like that.
Wow.
Or dressing up in top hat and tails and on a coach, 30 of us around the country, giving out free samples of a new alcoholic drink called Sheridan. So, but it's so much fun.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
It was crazy fun. Yeah.
I guess, but the sort of thing that has a bit of a shelf life, because you're like, right, you can only do it for so long.
Yeah.
And you're questioning where you're going, where your life's going. Do you?
Yeah, it was. I ended up going out with one of the model dancers, and we decided that I needed a bit of a more stable job,
right?
and so I was always quite interested in finance and stuff like that. And John Charkle at the time were advertising for they were starting a new section, and they needed admin people, so I just sort of applied to that. And Simon Checkley, who now runs private finance, he stupidly gave me a chance.
And if my research is correct, they locked 4 of you in a room with one computer screen, and you all had a telephone that had only dialing out facility,
Yeah,
couldn't dial
it didn't
in.
ring.
Didn't ring. So what was that like? What was the culture like, and how did you sort of adapt to it?
Yeah, so my business, that's where I met my business partner now, Julian Ingle. So I started as I started as a nothing, basically doing loads of photocopying. And there are about 8 to 10 of us actually. And yeah, one phone in the middle that didn't ring. So our job was to make it ring. So the guys actually started with getting estate agency contacts. And one of the big ones that they got first of all was Savills. So we looked after Savills, and then there's a guy called Ron Waltons, a big shareholder at Charcoal at the time. He's now at Mortgage Force. He came over and he was doing new build stuff. So he was one of the first people to really actively look after new build builders and developers, and it sort of grew from there really.
And can you paint a picture for our audience, which is obviously quite diverse, but a large proportion of it is specialist finance professionals. What was the what is it like in the mid 90s? Because as I understand it, most people didn't work with a mortgage broker. Most people went to their bank or building society for a mortgage. So how did you sort of penetrate the market? How did you effectively find a way to offer the customer something that was different or better than they were getting from their
well, that's
bank?
what Charcoal did well back in the day, and that's where John Garfield, Ian Darby, who was a bit of a hero of mine because he was one of the first real big mortgage broking marketeers that really marketed what we do. There was only John Charcoal and Chase DeVere at the time. There was only 2 real sort of well-known mortgage brokers. And you're right, most people went to their bank or building society. There were no proc fees, nothing like that. So we would just charge a fee for our advice, package everything up, send it off in the post, and you'd wait a few days until the lender called you. They'd received it. But it was, it was really good what they did. They really started to engage, especially with a lot of building societies around, look, we can bring more business to you. We can do the marketing for you to our clients. And so we can distribute your products. So it was all about doing deals with the lenders about how we can distribute your products for you. And it was really interesting. It sort of changed how mortgage broking worked. And then along came Alexander Hall. I think they were the next ones to come along. And it was really just the 3 of us for ages in terms of that mortgage broking space. And I guess from a lending perspective, they started to realise, hold on, this is really good. We don't need to pay for advertising. These guys can do it for us. And as I say, this was before proc fees. And actually it worked really well, and it sort of grew and grew and grew.
Just looking at the next phase in your career, so you were at John Charcoal, and then I believe you went to a company called Cobalt. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what sparked the move, and what was the transition like?
It was it was interesting. So I've been at Charcoal for about 8 years, and I guess you start to see that change where actually the legends of Charcoal decided, actually, I'm going to go off and start my own business. So you had Savills Private Finance with Mark Harris being created. You had Kevin Duffy leaving. You had Richard Taylor leaving. You had all these legends. Mark setting up Kingsway. So all these legends started to sort of leave and set up their own businesses. And it was at the time where Charcoal also got bought out by Bradford and Bingley and became a very different beast. And the change, it became much more corporate. Some of the management that were put in place in the time, let's just say didn't see eye to eye with them. in terms of how to do things. And it was a natural step, and I wanted to, evolve. And yes, I could have stayed at charcoal for forever, but it wasn't the place that I remember and wanted to stay at. And Julian, who I'd worked with when I started at charcoal, he had left a couple of years before and was then getting together with another person from charcoal, Andrew Drummond, and setting up Cobalt. And yeah, they invited me to join and be a director there early on. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I've always had that sort of entrepreneurial spirit and wanting to push myself. So yeah, I sort of took the leap. The timing was right. I met my then wife, and who went on to be my wife. So I was in a bit of a more secure position, and so I thought I'd make that leap and make that change.
And what was life like at Cobalt? What were the subsequent years?
It was the early years were fun. It was it was about helping the guys grow a business, and we knew estate agencies, so that was our natural thing. So we went round and did deals with all the independent estate agents around sort of the Knightsbridge area, which was the area where we were based, and that worked really well, and we grew the business from there. It was interesting. It was interesting days. It was a lot more partying. It was a lot more. It was hard work, but it was good days early on.
And what then led to, I suppose, your departure from Cobalt and the setting up of Corico?
So the Cobalt then went and merged with Cobalt then went and merged with a company called Chelsea Mortgage Management, which was run by then Richard Taylor, who had also left charcoal. So they were Bristol based, and it became quite a big entity. So it became about 90 people, 3 different locations: Knightsbridge, the city, and Bristol. And there were 4 main people who ran it. Let's just say Richard sadly passed away. And I guess the others didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of things, and we, as a sort of who became the senior management team underneath them, didn't see eye to eye with a lot of them either, or with 2 of them in particular. And then the credit crunch hit, and just sort of decimated the industry. So I remember Jules saying at the time, it's almost when Lehman Brothers went down, it's almost like mortgage broking became illegal overnight. So we lost about, it must have been about 70% of our business just went bang.
Wow. We
were big into buy to let, etc. And that really changed everything. And the company just couldn't sustain it. So we all got made redundant in the end.
Oh.
And there was, we always knew that we wanted to work with Julian again. He was one of the good guys. And myself, Matt Lowndes, Francois Talliard were getting together and deciding, look, are we going to do, I knew marketing PR by then. Matt was doing an MBA. Francois had done an MBA and was good at finance and that kind of stuff. So we thought, well, should we go and do something ourselves? And we didn't quite know what to do, and we decided, actually, let's set up our own mortgage brokerage and be the idiots in charge. So we roped in Roy Hardy, who was really instrumental in getting some people together, and then later down the line we asked Rob, and there was another guy involved, and we set up Corico.
So was that 2008, 2009?
2009, April 2009. We set up the day that the FTSE hit its lowest point.
Oh, that's right. I remember you saying that in a previous interview.
Yeah.
So that was, you couldn't, the market world couldn't have felt any lower, right, at that point?
Yeah, that's right. And the first 6 months was really tough. We didn't get paid anything. We just sort of tried to... we sort of assigned roles to each other, and I always knew I was going to do the brand, and I'd come up with a name, and I was lucky that doing all the PR and marketing, I picked up a lot of goodwill from a lot of journalists, and so they quoted me really early on. So really early on, Corico was getting quoted in the Sunday Times, for example, as a big company alongside Savills and Charcoal, and so people assumed you're
a bigger and more established company.
So, I read a brilliant book at the time called Marketing Judo, and that was my sort of approach of how you get a little name associated with the big names, and then that power of association works really well.
You've had quite a meteoric rise in the real estate industry. You know, you're obviously very young. You've won a highly coveted Young Property Personality Award at the Props, which is, you know, very highly respected. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are. You know, obviously having ascended to head of origination at a well-respected debt business now. Despite being really young, you beat off a lot of competition for this Young Property Personality Award at the Props. You know, with the likes of Nick Christoffi, for, you know, fellow podcast alumni in there as well. How did, talk us through the journey? How did you get to where you are? Because from what I understand, it's pretty inspiring.
So if I take it back to kind of being at university, I went originally to Loughborough to study sociology. The reason for that was I've always been really, really interested in kind of the world, people, how things work. And I think looking back, I was kind of preparing for today, actually thinking about my role and kind of what I've done. It always transcends back to kind of an understanding of people, the world, and how it kind of all works. So I studied sociology at Loughborough. In between kind of my second and third year, I did an internship at Lloyds, and I really enjoyed working on the real estate led projects at Lloyds Bank when I was there for kind of 10 weeks over the summer between my second and third year. I then joined Octopus, and I joined in a very junior role when I first joined. My role was to basically take in the loan application forms, process them, and then kind of get them moving, you know, get people their funds. And then I quickly moved into what was the commercial team there. So in that team, we focused on lending on things like hotels, offices, industrial units, sites. And I was there for basically the whole time when I was at Octopus. And I really kind of learnt my craft there. So I learnt how to kind of get a deal from the very beginning, from the inquiry, you know, the person calling you up with what they need, all the way to kind of the funds out the door, and also managing that loan and kind of managing it from a portfolio management perspective. I also gained experience on kind of fundraising, how you manage a fund, raise a fund, how you deal with all types of kind of stakeholder relationships. And then, in November 23, I moved over to GRE, and it's a great business, and we're kind of doing great things. And that's kind of the journey. The one thing I did miss out is that during that time at Octopus, I became a chartered surveyor, did my masters, and I started managing people when I was at Octopus, and all those things. I had a real variety of experience up until moving, and actually that gave me a real great foundation in the industry. And just the one thing I would say to people is, and the one thing I think is super useful and super interesting to learn, just learn how to get a deal done. How do you actually get a deal over the line? And I think that's super important for people coming up through the industry, not to be siloed.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about GRE finance in a minute, and obviously you're one of your colleagues, Michael Mirrorman, I've known for a long time and have a lot of respect for, and we've done business together in previous life. But you know, the story you're telling, you know, probably very, very modestly sounds like one of, you know, just a sort of meteoric rise to a really great position of authority in the specialist finance world. What were the, you know, can you give some examples of some of the adversity that you encountered in that journey? Because, you know, it's not going to have been smooth sailing the whole way, right? So
some of the adversity, I think, is around just the kind of the hard yards, the hours spent in the office, the hours, you know, there was a period where I was doing a job, I was doing my masters, I was trying to become a chartered surveyor, and actually doing those three things amongst kind of having a life and having a social life and kind of being a good friend, sister, daughter, and all those things, that, you know, that comes with its own adversity, just managing all of those things and spinning all of those plates. I think there's also been times in my career where people probably haven't backed me and haven't kind of believed in me, and I've always had to believe in myself. So there's kind of two areas of adversity, I think.
When you talk about someone not backing you, not believing you, what does that look like? Like, can you give an example of of when that happened?
I think obviously owing to my age, I think there's been times where people just haven't thought that I was probably good enough to be involved in the things I was being involved with, or, wasn't deserving of a promotion or a pay rise or whatever it was. And often it came back to my age, and often it came back to kind of years of service. And I think that's not necessarily the right approach to take with people, when you're running organizations. But actually, that was. I never let it stop me. I just kept trying, kept pushing, relentless in kind of like driving forwards in what I was doing.
As someone who, runs a business, a similar business to Octopus and GRE, from a learning perspective, how do you think that would have been better dealt with? Like, how do you think that Octopus might have looked after you better in that situation, which is not necessarily speak down to Octopus, but, it's quite common for businesses to reward people based on time served rather than what they've achieved and the direction that they're going in. Could you maybe give me some advice as to how might I, if I was faced with someone like you in your position, how might I reward them better, in that circumstance?
I think the problem becomes, and I think this covers a lot of larger businesses or businesses that are going through a transition where they're going from small, medium to large, is that it can, it gets the kind of performance reviews, it gets the bonus time, pay rise time, and it's really difficult to manage that as a process. You have to kind of structure it in a way where there's quantifiable markers and frameworks. But I think it's really important to get under the skin. As a business owner, as a leader, you need to get under the skin of what people are actually doing day to day. And I think one of the other things that I've learned actually over the years, and someone once said to me in a meeting, never ask the most senior person to talk first. And what that means is often people will follow the views or of the most senior person, so they'll speak first, they'll say something, and generally everyone else then aligns themselves and aligns their thoughts to that person. Actually, I think you need to make sure that you're speaking to the most junior people, understanding what is going on the ground with people. But I appreciate in a much larger organization when you need to try and find some way of paying people fairly and rewarding people fairly, it can be super difficult. But I think it's really just making sure that however you're monitoring people, it's not just quantitative, there's a qualitative nature, and that you're getting verbal feedback from people. You're getting that's what I would say. So
why GRE Finance? Why the move? What was the thing that really sparked that? How did it come about?
So I think when you're working in any organisation, you really have to buy into the people that are leading the organisation. So Daniel and Michael are, they're incredible business people. They know real estate, they know property, they understand lending really, really well. So I pretty much bought into those two. And GRE Finance as a business, we kind of cover all sectors. We're very real estate led, which I think is really important for me. So I feel like I have not passion, that sounds a bit of a cliche, but I find buildings interesting, I find building projects interesting, and we're very much real estate led. We focus on value add opportunities, kind of planning led type deals, and we focus on things that are a bit different or a bit quirkier in the market. And actually I think that's something that really pulled me. So the two of them and the type of stuff that we look to do. Yeah.
So again, because I'm not super familiar with GRE's product set, and certainly not always coming up, or not seeing GRE terms sort of in competition with Avamore's terms. Can you kind of give us an idea as to what, if a broker has a deal on their desk, when should they be picking up the phone to you at GRE to talk about what you can offer them?
Yeah, so how we kind of categorize the type of deals we do is they are focusing on transitional assets or value add opportunities. So typically the types of deals we do, so I mentioned we cover all sectors. So that is anything from kind of existing housing stock all the way through to offices, hotels, petrol stations, all of those kind of nuanced assets. And really the loans that we go into, when we go into them, there is always a kind of uplift in value throughout the loan term. And that may be by way of planning gain, a change of use, leasing up a multi-let office, or things like that. In terms of, so they're the types of deals we do, and we try to look at things with a real commercial approach. So if there's something that might be quirky or nuanced, you kind of come to us and we'd be able to look at it with kind of a different lens to other people in the market. Types of deals we've done recently, we completed a open storage site on Park Royal. So we'll do things that maybe other lenders aren't necessarily familiar with the sector, or they're not comfortable with the sector yet. We can kind of get comfortable with a variety of sectors, but generally the theme is always that there's a value uplift during our loan term.
I mean, and ticket size wise, what sort of what sort of sizes of loans? What do you not get out of bed for less than
2 million?
2 million. Okay, that's a good
2 million.
starting point, really.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
and the upper end of the limit.
50 million.
50 million. Okay, it's a pretty good. It's a pretty good range.
Yeah.
Talk us through the beginning, first of all, where first of all, like accounting and finance.
Not the most exciting.
How did you even get into that as a degree?
I mean, maybe first of all, thank you for having me. Honoured to be asked. I've seen many of your clips on Instagram and so on. I thought, God, when will he eventually ask me? And I think very interestingly, you mentioned, I think you were probably one of the first people I met with in terms of lenders when I had started my journey in this industry, and sort of went out there, started meeting lenders, thinking like, I'll go meet some people and see if I can work out what this stuff's all about. And I probably sat there and did lots of nodding and lots of pretending that I knew what you were talking about. But I think, interesting enough, that was probably a similar time to you starting your
we were pretty early.
Avamore journey.
We were pretty early in our journey. We founded. This is our 10th year, right? So we would have been probably about a year old or less as a business when we met you. So yeah, I mean, we were as clueless as you were probably at the time.
You sounded like you knew what you were talking about. But yeah, taking rewind my life back to kind of early-ish days. My father was in the military. I went to boarding school from a very, very early age. I always wind my parents up that I call it 6 years old, but I think it was 7 going on 8 very quickly starting in September. But I had, a really great time. I loved boarding school. I loved what was living with mates. I think it gave me a very good grounding and a very good early ability to look after myself, to decide that, look, someone's not going to do that for you. Go and look after yourself doing it. And, I wouldn't change that for the world. A lot of people kind of say to me, like, when you say, I went to boarding school at this age, they kind of think, oh, poor you, a lot of the response I get, sort of thing.
I want to ask that because actually I was at my kid's school for a sports match on Wednesday, and the question was asked of me, do I think that children who go to private school or have a private education, are they just naturally more confident? And my response to that was absolutely yes. I mean, I had a girlfriend in the first year of university. I was privately educated. She went to state school, albeit in in Parpenden, so not exactly, she wasn't exactly slumming it. Yeah. But there was you could see when she was hanging out with the girls who went to private school that, even though they were playing on the same hockey team or whatever, you could see that there was a big difference. You could see that she shrank within herself because she just, I think there's something about going to private school that in my opinion naturally gives you a bit of confidence that you might not benefit from if you unless it was natural to you, for example.
I agree, and I think especially boarding, I think there's nowhere kind of to hide. You're there all the time. You can be quiet. You can go home to your kind of home, safe space, whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But you can kind of go back into your shell, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And be in your shell and then go home and kind of quietly go about your own business. I think it forces you to make relationships. It forces you to make friends, and sort of on a deeper level. I think some of my best friends, pretty much all of my friends, are from school. I played sport with those people. I didn't go to kind of external sports clubs, things like that that people do. But I kind of had a journey as well, which was, talking of a confidence point of view, was an interesting one where I was one of only, when I started boarding at this school called Taunton School, fantastic school, had a brilliant time. I was one of only 2 boarders in my year. So which was, fair enough. It wasn't the biggest school. It wasn't the largest number of boarders, especially at that age. People tend to come in to boarding, I guess, maybe around the age of 10 or just before GCSEs or what have you.
I mean, seven's still pretty brutal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my sister was there, and but funnily enough, she hated every minute of it. She couldn't wait to go home, and my parents had to call her to get me to talk to me because I was just so busy, running around smashing a cricket ball, football, whatever it might have been. Wasn't any golf at that stage quite yet. Maybe I should have got on that earlier. I might not have had such a failed career. But I was I was in there very, very early, and I would say I was probably a big fish in a fairly small pond.
Yeah.
In terms of everyone joined, therefore I was the one that had been there for the longest. Everyone looked up to me, kind of thing, and naturally, I've always been a fairly large person, so probably personality as well. And then that kind of changed very, very quickly for me. When I got to 16, I'd probably got in enough trouble at that school, caused enough problems, and had a really good opportunity to go and pursue a sports scholarship at a very, very well-known school, especially for sport. And so I took that opportunity, but very, very quickly, I was then joining an environment that had probably in total, I think there's about 1,500 boarders at that school. They'd all forged relationships through the kind of age of 13 to then coming in at the age of 16, going on 17. Everyone really has their relationships, and you just kind of you a little bit start again. So that was kind of an interesting experience.
You were like the Johnny come lately, basically.
Yeah.
And what's worse is that, this is presumably another school in Somerset. So
yeah. A school called Milford.
Yeah.
Brilliant school. And even still, some of my friends today joke with me and say, kind of, we founded you. If we hadn't found you, you'd still have been just out there hitting golf balls, and no one would have known who you were, kind of thing. But that was an interesting experience. But I got exposed to some incredible different experiences, different opportunities. And that was really, really good. And actually, I suppose partly why I am where I am today is one of those friends was someone that introduced me after university to an accountancy firm. And this accountancy firm kind of said to me, look, yeah, come in, come under our wing. You can finish your ACA with us, blah, blah, blah. We're having a golf day on whatever date it was. Come along. So I came along to that, and, at that stage, skipping out a bit, where I sort of my dream was always to be a professional golfer, never quite made it. So came back to London, went to university here, and then worked here a bit while at university until kind of realizing that I probably needed to get a proper job at some stage. So, as ironic as it sounds, I was having a sausage roll and a beer at the halfway hut through this golf day, and I met this guy, a great guy, who was actually the interim sales director at Ennis for a small period of time. And he essentially looked at me and said, you don't want to do that. That's dull. That's boring. And I thought to myself, everyone has said accountants are quite boring people, but I didn't have any other qualifications or idea how to kind of, get somewhere. I always wanted to achieve something, but how to do that from what I knew seemed quite difficult. So I thought, at least I can do this for a bit and then maybe try and do something else. And that was really that. And I think very, very quickly I started working for them, and right at the bottom, and sort of got into the industry that way, and then, met you and everything changed.
It's interesting one, because knowing you quite a bit now, obviously over the years, the idea of you being an accountant sort of makes me laugh because you're there's nothing against accountants. I think that but a lot of people go through the accountancy qualification process, but ultimately they leave it because that professional qualification acts as a springboard for them to do things in other industries. But ultimately, I'm just knowing you a bit. I think you're too outgoing, and your personality. I don't think you even made it through the exams to get your ACA.
I was going to say to you, the first thing I would say is I'm not intelligent enough to be one either. I maybe can come across as intelligent in terms of numbers. I always struggled reading at school. Reading was never my thing. I probably could on one hand tell you how many books I've ever finished, and it was probably because I had to for some sort of qualification or exam. So it was never really something for me. So I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, even accountancy with numbers, right? I think it's just, you know, I think you're much better with people. So, you know, not being that. I think I can see that's just a natural flaw. And by the way, I'm like, I get it, because I first wanted to be a doctor, or I say I want to be a doctor. I'm a son of immigrants, so of course I have to be a doctor, right? and then I scuffed up my GCSEs. So then I was like, right, well, I guess that's a lawyer then. And then I scuffed up my A levels. Yeah. And then, but the irony is that actually now I know, now I see what lawyers do day in, day out. I married someone who was qualified as a solicitor. I like what you, of course, I'm not. That was the wrong thing for me. I would have absolutely hated being a lawyer. You know, like that level of attention to detail and all the rest of it. It would just drive me insane.
Yeah, the focus as well of those professionals in that space. You said lawyers, doctors, accountants. Just, I mean, take my hat off to them. It's impressive that harder work in that kind of manner is impressive.
Yeah.
You look a bit like a doctor, to be fair.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
If I don't know, I think I'm quite good at bullshit. So, you know, like if you ever see me in a white lab coat, run. But like, let's talk about the sort of the beginnings at Ennis. You know, like what's it like going in as a sort of fresh grad into what's become quite a successful mortgage brokerage or commercial finance brokerage, under also a couple of industry legends in Hugh and Isla as well. What was it like joining Ennis and kind of being very wet behind the ears and not really having a clue what you're doing?
It was. I've kind of always been. I like a challenge. It was fairly eye-opening for me at the start. I was just, in this environment, but I'd never been in. I'd never worked. I'd worked in, when I was at university, I worked in shops and that kind of thing, but I'd never been in an office environment and walked into a room and seen people, and people look at you like, who the hell's this new guy? Who the hell's that lanky twat? It's probably what most of them are thinking. But I'd say, first of all, I was incredibly fortunate. Hugh and Isla were great. I think they had a period where they probably weren't too sure about me. But I was very, very fortunate in that I was good at talking to people, always been very good at talking to people. So my first job was on the phone, so just calling up people. So within reason, I think if you build rapport with someone, they don't mind too much if you don't know what they're talking about. So that I thought I was quite good at, quite quick at. I realized that I didn't want to do that for very long. So I knew what I had to do to not be that person anymore. On your point about graduates, there were quite a few of us. Young guys in there coming in at the same time. And, two of which, one of which now works for me, two of which did work for me. So we kind of founded some friendships there and stuff like that. So we kind of were lucky, or certainly I was lucky, that progression was very, very quick. There was an opportunity where Ennis had a bridging department, I remember, for a very small period of time. And there was the kind of commercial and development department, which was run by two guys, one of which very, very well known, to the industry. I call him a bit of an industry dinosaur now, but Chris Whitney.
I know Chris, yeah.
And I didn't, to be honest, I didn't have a relationship with him very quickly. They were one side of the room, we were the other. But the other half of that partnership, Rob Hayward, he left the business very soon after I joined. Maybe I'd been there for probably about 2 months. And credit to Hugh and Isla, what those guys do very well, I'd say, or did very well then, certainly, I haven't been in the business for a long time, was take people they had within the business and say, right, that person can probably fill this hole. Part of it's probably from a cost perspective, it's a much, much cheaper way to do that. You might not get experience, but you get someone who's probably driven and kind of try and fill that role. So that's what I did. And I went into that role and, started meeting guys like yourself and just tried to learn as quickly as possible. But I was certainly fortunate to have had that step. I know some other people who came into the business just after me who stayed in that role, what we call client services, telephone salesman, basically, in so many ways, stayed in that role for a year and a half before they were given progression. And I also think I was very lucky to be given progression into the specialist space. I don't think, a bit like an accountant, I don't think the standard space would have suited my personality.
When you say standard, you mean like regulated mortgage?
Yeah,
right?
regulated mortgages. What I would call, more of a processing role behind a screen, maybe lots of time still on the phone, but you're not meeting people, seeing sites, sitting down. You don't meet the lender. I'd have a phone call with you and go, Mr. Barclays, Michael, how are you? Will you do this mortgage? It's like, computer says no, put it through the computer, look at the steps. So I think I was also very fortunate there. So that was that stage to starting my broking journey.
What was the progression like before you went from being in the NS West Hampstead office, working with Chris on the commercial stuff, to basically setting up the central London office for them? Like, how did that come about?
So that was kind of myself and another guy at NS. We kind of we got to the stage where we maybe outgrown the place, or not necessarily in terms of ability, but just in terms of a challenge. And so we always sat down and said, look, let's do something ourselves. You're a residential mortgage guy, you're a regulated guy, I'm a specialist guy. What can we do? Let's bring us together and let's see what we can do. And so we then progressed into, funnily enough, through a guy from another lender, introduced us to a firm based in Manchester called Watts. So Watts Commercial had their business up in just outside of Manchester, up that way. And we met with those guys that ran that business, and we said to them, we all got on and said, look, we'll open your London office for you, try and grow that team, get you kind of boots on the ground down here, and kind of go from there. That was a big step. It was tough. COVID hit probably 10 months into that journey. And you'll know, with your experience, that starting a business and building a book of clients, etc., takes probably 3 months to do that part, and then another 3 to 6 months to do kind of get the pipeline through and get deals on the books and start to come through. So that came at a tough time, but I think, as and everyone knows, very, very quickly that turned into, my God, what were we all going to do? This business is, doomed. This is all over, to stamp duty reductions in the world going absolutely nuts. So things kind of then picked up very, very quickly from there. That didn't work out, not as a business. Me and my business partner exited that business and left those guys, the original owners, to keep running that business, which is still going, a part of their bigger brand. But there was just things that the experiences we had, I'd say the best way to put it, compared to the experiences they had of the way they wanted to run the business, we wanted to run the business. And it was a really nice halfway house, and it taught me a lot about running a business. And it was a good halfway house for that, but it wasn't like your baby, it was like, we have our own branding, we have our own marketing. This is our strategy. I know it works, so follow this strategy.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Property Funder podcast. You can find me on the internet at property_funder, and please remember to like and subscribe. See you on the next one. Thanks, and bye-bye.